Well, hi everybody, and thanks very much for coming, and I'm honored and humbled to be here. Yes, I'm with BDS Analytics. We started this company 4 years ago in Colorado. We started the company to do essentially what happens in almost every other industry and just bring it to the legal cannabis industry. So in my background, I've built about 6 different companies that are mainly about data, information, and insights, especially focused on market research. One of those companies was Spins in the natural foods industry, and my team come from another company called Leisure Trends NPD, which does electronics, and it also does biking and outdoor industry, for example. So other companies that are similar to us in some ways are IRI and Nielsen, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. So I'm going to try and cover a number of topics, but we promise some takeaways for people here. We promise that you'd learn how to use data in order to build more successful businesses. Our clients are especially brands and cultivators in the industry. We focus heavily in the West so far, where the industry's got going a little earlier. And we're publishing detailed data on Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, and soon Nevada. Those states collectively about 85% of the current legal US market, but they won't be for much longer because, of course, the Midwest and the East are getting going now. And so we're expanding our business and moving it across the country in line with legalization. So now, very quickly, who is this guy? Well, BDS Analytics does these 3 things. We do consumer insights. So we, in our past experience, have done massive quantitative surveys of consumers. We've now surveyed 28,000 consumers about their cannabis consumption or their intention or not to consume cannabis. It's really important to ask people who are not consumers what their attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs are as well. The core of our business is this GreenEdge point-of-sale analytics service. We've now processed almost 1 billion transactions through our system. So we partner with dispensaries in the states that we focus on. They get our service for free, or at least the first people to sign on get the service for free. We pull in the data from whatever point-of-sale system they use. We now process data from 25 different point-of-sale systems. And of course, it's all a big mess. So we normalize it, standardize it, put it into a big SQL database, the kind of thing that Thomas was doing 20 years ago. And then we present that data in an aggregated form so that you, our clients, can understand the trends in the industries. In addition, I just skipped over, we provide some industry intelligence data. So we write reports, we write a big book called The State of Legal Marijuana Markets and the Cannabis Intelligence Briefings. We have about 35 people. We're pretty much 100% immersed in the industry. So a little bit of insight there. We present all of this through a portal that you can learn about at bdsanalytics.com. So we've now got more than 2,500 brands in our system. This is the most innovative industry in America, certainly the most innovative consumer products industry. There are new products being created every day. There are new brands born every week, multiple new brands being born every week. So it's an exciting and innovative place. Our consumer insights, we survey on a projectable basis. So we're not talking about people who are registered with a particular dispensary or provisioning center. We're not talking about loyalty programs because those are a skewed audience. We're actually surveying a demographically balanced group of people in every state in the United States, every province in Canada. So something like 1,000 people in Michigan, for example, who are the same age, sex, socioeconomic situation. And then we can draw conclusions from that about the entire state's attitude towards the industry and their behaviors, their likes and dislikes. And eventually now we're getting into things like brand recall, brand recognition, which products have you tried, which do you like, when do you consume, Do you prefer edibles versus inhalables? And all of those sorts of vital questions that as the industry gets going, the marketing and product development teams need to know, but also dispensaries need to know as they think about the consumer of tomorrow in addition to the consumer of today. As I said, we synthesize a lot of this information into various publications. So let's start talking about what is actually happening. Here are our growth projections for the industry. We're talking about projecting 27% compound growth worldwide. And we hear a lot about worldwide. Of course, recently we heard a lot about Canada. And Canada is going to be an important market, no doubt. But we have to put this into context. The US market will still be over 70% of the global market in 5 years' time. The only other global market that really measures up is Germany, which at the moment is largely being supplied by the Canadian companies, of course, but may soon be supplied by companies in Uruguay and Colombia and other places as well. So before we get too excited about all of the other markets, let's remember that our home market, I know I've got an English accent, I've lived in America for 25 years, this is home to me. Sorry, should clarify. And what is actually happening and what's driving this? Well, adult use is what is driving it. Obviously an important question here in Michigan. The changes, of course, in regulations in Canada mean that essentially the market has gone almost 100% adult use in Canada. The same happened, of course, this year in California. We went from an unregulated, really, medical market to a regulated adult use market, not without challenges and bumps in the road, but it's happening, and so we're seeing this turnover into a new classification, and of course a lot of medical consumers not bothering to renew their medical cards and just purchasing, being quite content to purchase in the adult use stores. Now, legal cannabis is evolving very rapidly. Most of this audience here, I know you're very familiar with the trends that are going on. So, you know, it used to look like this, and now it looks like this. We talk to a lot of people from outside the industry, beverage alcohol companies, tobacco companies, financial people who are paying attention to the industry. This is the kind of thing that helps them to realize that the industry is becoming normalized. The consumer is the everyday consumer that you see going into every other kind of store. They're just going into a dispensary or provisioning center now. And the experience that they have when they get into those locations is a normal experience that you would expect in a pharmacy or a boutique, for example. Now we're seeing all kinds of different approaches taken to stratifying the consumer base. You've got mainstream products, you've got premium and luxury products, you've got discount products, exactly what you see in every other type of retail location. And brands are now everywhere. When we started this company 4 years ago, one of my big concerns was that the main customer for our service would be a brand. And in Colorado, for example, at that time, branded products were only about 20% of total market sales. Well, branded products in Colorado are now over half of the sales in the market. And brands have grown very, very rapidly, existing brands as well as, of course, new brands being born every day. So branded products in the markets that we cover, the 85% of the US, are now about 40% of total sales, actually a little over 40% of total sales. And even flour is starting to be branded in a significant way, whereas up until recently, efforts with branded flour were not making much progress. We're also seeing companies identifying specific consumer need states and targeting those types of consumers with products that talk about mood states, for example. So you're seeing how rapidly this is evolving. I came from the natural foods industry, worked with companies like Whole Foods, 20 odd years ago, And I thought that industry became more professional with its consumer packaging fairly quickly. Well, everything that happened in health food stores, and we'll all remember, back in the day when it was grains and nuts and oats, and they were sold in bulk bins in the health food store, and that doesn't really happen much anymore. That's a tiny percentage of sales, because everything is branded and packaged. Well, that's happening in this industry about 5 times as fast as it happened in the natural foods industry. And we're seeing all kinds of developments on new technology, specialized delivery systems, for example, people trying to address delayed onset or uncertain dosage questions and concerns that consumers have about what effect is this going to have on me and when is it going to take effect. Nobody seems to have solved these things, but there's a lot of investment in technology going on at the present time. And of course, it's not just about THC. CBD interest is tremendous, and we're going to see a number of very large companies entering into the CBD world as well, or what we might call the total cannabinoid world. CBD is convenient, but of course it's CBG, CBN, and other terpenes as well that major companies are interested in. So let's have a look quickly at state-by-state performance. I got a lot of charts here, but we'll get through them quickly. So here you can see, that some medical markets, of course, haven't really done anything very exciting. You can see Colorado's medical market sort of flat and then down over the last 12 months or so, and Oregon has just gradually declined. Of course, why is that? Well, it's because their adult use markets have grown tremendously during that time, looking at 40 to 50% compound growth rates over 3+ years in Colorado, Oregon, Washington. Great growth going on. And then in some markets like Arizona, we all remember the disappointment about Arizona not getting an adult use. Well, their medical market has grown tremendously because it turns out that if you don't over-regulate and restrict companies, your medical business can grow quite well. And so what might have been the adult use market in Arizona is turning into a thriving medical market. So which product categories are driving that growth? So a lot of what we do is we develop a product database, a huge catalog of all the products that are being sold. It's very hard sometimes to categorize these products. We look at 4 basic categories. We look at flower, concentrates, edibles, pre-rolled, and topicals products, actually 5. And then within those categories, we have all kinds of subcategories. Not so much with flour, of course. There's not that much in the way of subcategories there. But within concentrates, you have vape products, you have wax, shatter, oils, and various other types of concentrates. In edibles, we're all familiar with chocolates, gummy bears, not gummy bears, gummies in general, and those kinds of delivery systems. And then pre-rollers speaks for itself, and topicals, salves, lotions, etc. And I should not skip over. What we have seen is that flour, 4 years ago in Colorado, for example, represented about 65% of sales. It has grown, as you can see from the chart. It's grown about 50% over this time period. But concentrates have outgrown everything massively, and they're up to about 32% of the market now. Edibles have outgrown as well, up to about 16% of the market. Pre-rolled, about 7%. So we're seeing this steady evolution of product categories in the industry. Oregon, same kind of end result. They had a bumpy road in part because of regulatory issues, not having testing regulations established and then not having enough labs to do the testing, all those sorts of things. Bless the regulators. But anyway, those that survived this bumpy passage are beginning to do better now. And you can see that the consumers are again favoring concentrates, edibles, and pre-rolled product over flour. So what the result is that you see this kind of composition, and sorry, something seems to have gone wrong with the translation of the slides, but you can see that basically it's about the same across the states, and we've got California there in the middle. These pies are roughly proportional to the size of the markets in those individual states. So California, a great big market, 683 million in Q2 of 2018, whereas Oregon is about a fourth of that size. And here you can see Arizona has even gone more rapidly towards concentrates, with concentrates being 37% of consumption now. So let's have a little bit of a look at the concentrates market, because it is the hottest thing so far. You can see that it's contributed 91 million of the growth in the market here in Colorado over those 4 years. And the growth rate associated with concentrates is about over 50% compound growth. It's an area where a number of companies have done extremely well, of course, some particular brands. And then within concentrates, you can also see shatter is still a significant subcategory, as is wax. And live resin has had very rapid growth from a very small size early on. If you look in Arizona, it's dominated by vape products. Vape products are over 70% of all concentrates. If you look in California, you see even more domination by vapes. Now they're up to 87% of the concentrates category. So people have skipped over the dabbables and basically gone to concentrates, or at least new consumers certainly have. And they've gone to vape products. So let's have a quick look at edibles. So edibles also have done very well, not quite as spectacular as concentrates, about 37% compound growth. Just a reminder to all of us, because we forget, but in the industries I used to work in, 3 or 4% growth was pretty exciting. You were like rocking and rolling if you had 5% growth. 37% compound growth. The message for businesses in the industry is you have to establish a business that's capable of handling that kind of growth with your management teams, with your supply chains, with your marketing and sales operations, etc. You have to be extremely flexible, and you have to be planning in advance for doubling your business, every year or every 6 months even in the case of some of our clients. Now, within edibles, you can see that candy is the star category. So, there's a lot of discussion about baked goods and those categories and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And sometimes it gives us a little bit of a smile, because the reality is those sorts of products are a very small proportion of what consumers are adopting. What they're actually adopting is candy and chocolates and tinctures mainly. And beverages, you hear a lot about beverages, a lot of excitement because, major players like Constellation Brands hooking up with Canopy Growth, and yet beverages actually are only about 7% of the edibles category, so less than 1% of total sales so far. Not to say they won't change, because the beverage products so far clearly need work. And the consumer is interested in beverage products, they're just not very satisfied with what's currently available. Candy has picked up about 4 points in California. Of course, we all have to keep reminding ourselves, you can't compare last year to this year in California, because last year was the relatively unlicensed medical market, and this year is this new era of adult use and licensing. Tinctures have also been popular in Oregon, and we have to remember that you have to think about your local regulations. Consumers in general are probably fairly similar from one state to another in terms of what they want. But regulations, as we know in this industry, are unique in almost every state. Every regulator seems to think they have a particular twist, a clever idea, or a big concern that they have that nobody else has thought of in any other state, as far as I can see. And so everybody has different rules, and therefore, for example, in Washington state, there are no gummy products. But there are products that are awfully close to gummies. They look very similar to gummies. They just don't meet the legal definition of gummies. And so infused foods, as I mentioned earlier, actually do fairly well in Arizona so far, but that's probably to do with the maturity of the market and the slower development of the chocolates and candy products. Brands, as I mentioned, brands are becoming very important in the industry. And here you can see that the people who've got started and are rocking and rolling are already taking a significant chunk of the market. So you can see that the top 5 brands in edibles in all of these states have more than 40% of the market already. That doesn't mean the game's up. It doesn't mean that they've beaten everybody else. It means that they got off to an early start and they've established good traction with the consumers. But there will be a lot of change and there will be a lot of turmoil among brands, and we're already seeing acquisitions and mergers and that sort of thing starting to take place. Now, some of these brands do spectacularly well. Here you can see the number 1 Colorado edibles brand now has nearly 20% market share and has grown consistently during a period of growth in the edibles market as well. But you can see the others, 2 or 3 of them have lost market share among those top players. And there have been a number of reasons for this, things like product recalls, which destroyed one of the major players in Colorado fairly early on. Management problems, partnership problems, supply chain issues, people not building an organization that's capable of handling this kind of rate of growth. As well as traction with the consumer, the difficulties associated with doing normal marketing, meaning that most of your advertising, if you like, is word of mouth, is getting the word out. And so it's events and that kind of thing. So you have to push for momentum. Now, price trends, of course, are really important. So everything I presented so far has been about the overall revenue for the industry or for the category. Well, in an environment, of course, of declining prices, that means volume is continuing to increase even more rapidly than the numbers I just showed. So average retail price of flower in Oregon, as you can see, has declined 36% over these 2.5 years, down to about $4.60 a gram. But in California, we've seen a different story. Pre-tax prices have actually risen across all categories over the last 1.5 years or so. If we take a look at Colorado, a more mature market that's a bit more stable in terms of the way it's operating now, you can see that the similar price reduction that we saw in Oregon for flower down to $4.20. I like that. Well, it's actually $4.19, but I like $4.20, so I put it on the chart. And you can see that edibles prices in Colorado have actually increased. That's largely because the consumer is tending to choose the $19.99 price point products, for example. So we have a lot of data on what's a more popular. Just under $20 is at a popular price point. And there also have been some brands that pitched lower price products that haven't managed to stay the course necessarily, and so there's less availability of those cheaper products. In concentrates, you can see that prices continue to go down as well. So what we're basically seeing is flower, wholesale prices declining. Flower takes an almost immediate hit for that, although it's a benefit for the consumer, yeah. Then concentrates, the next derivative from flower, their prices are declining as well, but not as rapidly. And as you can see, in the case of edibles, so those are the branded products, the edibles manufacturers are beginning to do quite well. 2 or 3 years ago, they'd say there's no margin in this business, especially when they deal with taxes and all the other problems they're dealing with. Now they're not really saying it, but it's obvious that there is a significant margin if you've established a brand for edibles or for concentrates for that matter. Okay, so a little bit about cannabis consumers. We do these extensive quantitative surveys. As I mentioned, we learn about who the consumers are, but more important really is the psychographics of these consumers. And it turns out, of course, that the consumers are almost every type of demographic of people: young, old, male, female, affluent, poor, educated, not very well educated, you name it. Every ethnic group as well is consuming cannabis. And it's important for us to explain this, especially to people who don't know the industry, because they have all of these stereotypes in their mind. They're thinking it's the stoner kid who lives in the basement of his mum's house, you know. And that the reality is that it's the lady who lives up the road. It's your Aunt Ethel, and it's the guy you work with who is a business professional who's very successful but is also a cannabis consumer. So it's important that we explain this again and again. The majority, of course, agree with some form of legalization, and you can see there's marginal differences between the US and Canada. So although Canada has, federal legalization, actually the consumers and the voters are behind the US in terms of their readiness for this market. So isn't it interesting that we've got a neighbor that has federal legalization and consumers that are less enthusiastic for it than we are. The majority, and this is important, legal cannabis is new, but cannabis consumption is not new, okay? So more than half of the population have been consumers of cannabis during their lifetime. They're quite familiar with it. They may not be familiar with the forms that it's available in these days and the consumer friendliness of the products. We divide the world of consumers up into consumers, acceptors, and rejectors. Acceptors are a very important group. Yeah, they're the people who haven't consumed in the last 6 months, but are open to consuming at some point in the future. They may be held back by concerns about the legal situation in their state. They may be held back by availability. There's no dispensary in my area, those sorts of things. But they're open to consuming. And rejectors are the people who say, no, I'm not going to consume ever. But at the same time, those rejectors very often say, but if it was helpful or useful for a loved one, I'm quite happy with them consuming. I'm not going to stop other people from consuming. And as you can see, there is a little bit of a difference again with Canada, a little bit behind the US in terms of the 23 versus 21% that are consumers. And the numbers of acceptors as well. And what we're seeing over time, state by state, is the movement from people from the rejector group into the acceptor group, and a significant number, about 7 or 8 points in California and Colorado in the last year, who moved from acceptor into consumer. And so that's the future trend. We like to say that cannabis consumers are happy campers. So this is addressing many of the characteristics of these people. I like the one at the bottom. They're more satisfied with life. So when you compare the consumers to the acceptors and rejectors, life feels better. I don't know if that's cause or effect. Some people would say it must be cause. They like to try new products. They're very social. They're quite creative and physically active. They are a younger population than the acceptors and rejectors as well. No surprise there for most people. But they are not the stereotypical 20-something. They're pairing cannabis with all sorts of other activities. A lot of people are surprised by the exercise, but in fact, in Boulder, Colorado, where I live, there are hardcore athletes who use cannabis every day to help them with their performance or recovery from performance. It's quite a well-established practice now. You can see that they're enjoying cannabis with music, movies, beer, fine dining, cocktails, wine, etc. The alcohol industry is, of course, concerned about the effect that cannabis might have on their sales. It's one of the reasons why people like Constellation Brands have moved into the industry, of course. And it may be having some effect, although you have to look in very great detail at the specific subcategories and the specific types of alcohol they consume. It might have an impact on beer, but not on premium beer. It might have an impact on, low-end spirits, but not on high-end spirits, for example. And we have tons of data on that. And then a couple of little insights. So consumers are now looking for low-dose products. That's been a very important trend out west. So as low as 2.5 milligrams, 5 milligrams, certainly under 10 milligrams is a popular group of products that are doing well. Here you can see that they're saying that they want portion control. 5 milligrams, certainly under 10 milligrams, is a popular group of products that are doing well. Here you can see that they're saying that they want portion control and they want something that they could nibble during the day rather than, in the evening and then get high. So these are some of the insights that we're getting about what consumers want. It's also, and isn't this fantastic? Cannabis is actually having an impact on other health categories like reducing prescription drug use, okay? So we've, of course, heard of some studies that correlate cannabis consumption with reduction in narcotics addiction and overdoses. This is consumers telling us, when we ask them this question unprompted, have you decreased your use of prescription drugs? 47% say yes. 51% say they've decreased their over-the-counter medication use as well. And 40% say marijuana has a role in my general personal care and wellness. So this is the kind of data that the big OTC and RX companies are now thinking about and saying, okay, this might be a threat or it might be an opportunity for us. Maybe we need to start getting involved in the cannabis industry going forward as well. If we look at the pain management, 58% of past 6 month consumers say they consume cannabis. By the way, a little terminology. I often hear people talk about people who like cannabis as users of cannabis. Can we not do that? We're consumers of cannabis. Users has a pejorative kind of connotation associated with it. So I hear people from outside the industry talking about users. No. We're consumers of cannabis, just like we're consumers of beverage alcohol. 58% of past 6 month consumers say pain management is a reason why they're consuming. And you can see that among those pain management consumers, they have a whole host of mental and physical conditions that they identify as reasons why they benefit from cannabis. So be thinking about those people as you're developing products, as you're positioning products in your dispensaries. And pain consumers, as I mentioned, have actually decreased their usage of prescription and OTC medication. So about 36% there, you can see, said, I'm at the same level with my RX prescriptions as I was previously, but 12% said I'm actually consuming more RX, which is normal, as people get, as their condition gets more serious or they get more used to the RX, they increase consumption. But look at this, 44% said I've actually reduced my consumption of prescription drugs for pain. And so we can see one of the substantial benefits of cannabis for pain consumers is avoiding these potentially harmful side effects and addiction problems associated with OTC and prescription medications. And another thing to think about is when people consume. So this is, again, still looking at this subset of people who are pain management consumers. And you can see the difference between them and other consumers in terms of when they like to consume. You can see the tendency for later in the evening, before bed, and when I wake up during the night. Hardly surprising if someone has a chronic pain problem. So tremendous insights that are available about why people want these products. Okay, that's about it. We have a special offer for Michigan. We are bringing our service to Michigan, so if you have a dispensary here, please go to BDS Analytics /Michigan and sign up with us. We'd be happy for free to give you access to our GreenEdge platform, and or just email me or just grab me later or email any one of my team and you can learn about that. Okay. I think we do. I don't know. You would know better than me whether we have time. Not too many people have left, so I guess that's a positive.
As someone that really loves data, I have a million questions.
I bet you do. I probably can't answer most of them.
However, it's very clear that what you do has massive relevance to our market, right down to a business trying to get started, understanding how to stock their shelves and who their customers are. Based on all your experience and all the data you have seen across other states, how do you see Michigan growing in this emerging market, especially under the constraint of regulatory change?
Yeah. Yeah, and well, I understand that right now is a time of turmoil because of regulatory change here. And that's tough, that's brutal. So you have a business that's doing quite well, steady, and then all of a sudden you can't stay open, and there are all sorts of applications that you have to make, and you never know when you're going to get approved or whether you're going to get approved. And that's a time of dreadful uncertainty. California has been through the same thing over the last 12 months, and many of our clients have struggled, and they had to learn how to, and Oregon as well, you had to shut down operations for extended periods of time, lay off staff, all sorts of situations like that, with the testing laboratories in Oregon not being available. Massachusetts right now, there's no adult use products being sold yet because there's nothing that's actually gone through the testing process. And yet it was supposed to have happened months and months ago. So you've got to be patient, and you've got to have the resources to get you to weather that storm. But what we do know is that vast numbers of consumers want cannabis products, and they want these new and sophisticated products. They want the branded packaged goods that they can feel confident in the benefits and the effects and maybe side effects of these products. So the opportunity is great. You're just going to have a difficult and bumpy patch to get there. But I can see this market growing at a tremendous rate once the regulatory environment settles down and the regulators realize that well-run, well-organized businesses that meet the licensing requirements are something to encourage. And they like tax revenue, yeah? So Colorado, of course, everything changed once the tax revenue started to come in. You had a governor who said, I'm opposed to this. Now he's the strongest advocate for legalization. He's the guy who tries to sit down with Trump and tell him that it's a good thing. Okay, so once people get used to the fact that the consumer is the everyday person like you and me, and that they're not behaving in a bizarre way, and accident rates don't increase, and all of the other fears that people have are not being realized, then they see the benefits and the opportunity, and they become advocates. I mean, look at people like John Boehner, who just hated this industry, and now he's on the board of a company and he's speaking, on their behalf. Yeah, maybe he doesn't have the same principles that most of us in the room do, but he's learned something. Any other questions?
Yes.
With the increase of the vape market specifically, what do you see as the demographic breakdown for the increase in usage for that particular segment?
Yeah, great. So it's a very broad-based consumer of vape products. It's in many cases a new consumer as well. So people are coming to the market and they're skipping over flower altogether, especially quite a lot of older consumers who've said, well, I don't smoke, or I smoked once and I gave up smoking and I don't want to start smoking again. And so they're going straight to vape and to edibles products. But we also see it very much among younger consumers as well. Of course, vaporized products, these nicotine products that I'm not very fond of, because I have two boys who are in high school right now, are familiarizing the younger population with vape technology in general. And so it's very natural to them. And people, of course, feel that the dose is controllable, measurable, it takes almost immediate effect. So it's reassuring in many ways that vape technology, it might be the answer for a lot of people. Other questions?
About the many states that you have analyzed, which is the closest state that resembles Michigan, and where can we learn from them?
Yeah, that is a good question. You sort of think of the S-curve of growth of an industry, and I think what we've actually seen is across multiple states, more or less the same thing happening. Obviously California goes way back as a medical use state, but as an adult use or a regulated state, we don't have a lot of history there. We have a lot more history in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. And we've seen more or less the same trend, starting in Colorado because it had a 6-month head start over Washington, repeat itself in Washington in terms of who the consumers are, in terms of the adoption by new consumers, and in terms of the product categories as well. So we generally say look to Colorado for some guidance. Consumers, of course, there are subtle regional differences, but they largely have the same goals and objectives. Yes, sir.
Do you have any sort of data on like the social acceptance? Oops, sorry about that. Do you have any sort of data like on the social acceptance of that, of the the basic demographics, and then how is that actually affected when it goes recreational? And third part, is it more advantageous to actually adopt, because I saw you have more like a boutique dispensary, to adopt it, to actually have other types of products in
knows
there.
how deaf I am.
Yeah, other types of products in there to actually bring people in once it goes recreational.
Yes. So we started surveying consumers 2 years ago in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, and California. And then we repeated that survey 6 months later, and we've just done it again for the 3rd time now. And so I haven't actually seen the results yet. But what we have seen is that that acceptor group, especially in California and Colorado, moved to become consumers at a significant rate, especially in California, where we had this change of legal situation. So you went from a slightly shadowy, confusing environment requiring a medical card, even though the process to get a medical card was incredibly easy. In California, a lot of people didn't really want to do that. In Colorado, we've seen sort of the opposite. We've seen a lot of people who were medical consumers, patients with cards, just saying, well, now I can get the products in the adult use channel as well, which is often in the very same dispensary. There's an adult checkout, there's a medical checkout. And there aren't very many products that are only available in the medical channel. Some of the higher dose products are, but in general, most products are available in adult use as well. So we've seen a lot of those established patients not bothering to renew their cards and then moving into the adult use channel. And then, of course, in Washington State, there isn't really a medical channel anymore anyway. It all just became an adult use channel. So now we're seeing all of these consumers are across the spectrum from purely social needs to very severe health conditions that require high dose in some cases, all shopping in the same sort of places. In terms of social acceptance, yeah, we've seen very significant growth through the stages of legalization. We actually have 5 stages for the states, all the way from no medical to CBD only, all the way up through to adult use approved. And you can see that as states move through that progress, the consumers are ahead of the regulators in terms of their perception, but they also become even more enthusiastic as you move from one step to the next, because you're giving consumers choice, you're giving them access to safe medications. In most cases, they think of these as medications, and you're not seeing adverse effects.
Thank you very much, Roy. Any additional questions for Roy?
Sir?
I'm wondering if you can identify whether the a small number of high usage consumers are consuming a large percent of the product versus the long-tailed sort of syndrome,
Yes.
and how that's working.
Very good question. So yes, by revenue, it is still a market that's heavily influenced by the heavy consumer. Nobody's really categorized yet who these individuals are. We have the data, but we haven't really done the statistical work yet to define who those subgroups are or to come up with catchy terminology for them. But heavy consumers who are spending several $100s a month are still a very important part of the market by revenue. The growth of the market, they are part of the growth of the market, but they're not a major factor. The bigger factor is the new adopters who are coming in, who are very low initially, you know, $50 a month or less in many cases, one purchase a month. But then they move to 2 purchases a month or 3 purchases a month, and they're becoming significant consumers going forward. But don't forget, the current heavy consumer is still driving the majority of sales at the present time.